Our next speaker will be Dr. Sharad Dawla, who will be speaking to us on basic income as a citizen's right. Dr. Dawla has been working as a trade unionist, as a consultant in a whole series of organizations across the country. He is currently trustee Self-Employed Women's Association in Madhya Pradesh, where he is also the research director on the basic income pilot project. He is also the trustee of Aadhaar in Punjab and on the advisory council of the Nagrik Seva Trust in Karnataka. He has of course held at least taught in IIM Bangalore at the Administrative Staff College and a host of other institutions. And we are extremely fortunate to have him here, Dr. Sharad Dawla.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. I am really honored to be here. I'm thankful to BITS Pilani Hyderabad campus for inviting me for this. I really like this paperless life, paper-free life that we lead now. But I'm so out of compulsion, I had to carry something. That's why I'm carrying a program. But with the digital age, I just came without any paper. Well, I think a topic like this will take quite a while, but one thing constant about all seminars and conferences is that time is short. So I'll try and compress it, and it's an idea. It's an idea which is new in our country. It's actually new even worldwide. But various experiments are happening concerning this idea. In India, Seva has done this last 3 years. I was involved in this experiment. So I will try to elucidate and elaborate the idea, and also give you very minimum that I can evidence that comes from the study, because it's a study, it's a survey and a qualitative study spanning 3 years. So I'll try and stick to the time. What is basic income? Basic income is, as I said, it's a new idea. It's a proposed social security system that does not take into account, it's mainly discussed in Europe, let's not go into that. In its pure form, it's an income, it's a basic income, a small amount of money given to individuals without any conditions, without any means test, without having the requirement of them to work, or without them to prove that they have no other source of income, which are the normal conditions that any government grant will have. So the only requirement is that you should be a citizen. This is the pure form of the idea, that as a citizen you are entitled to a basic ground level income. It's not a top-up over what you already have, but it's a basic ground level income that you should have to meet your basic requirements. Above that, you add in from whatever you do. Now, what are cash transfers? Why am I using cash transfer? Cash transfer is the most common word that is used. But the difference, they are basically unconditional cash transfer and unconditional basic income are basically the same. But then unconditional cash transfer, the word cash transfer is a kind of a technical word where you are actually talking in a neutral way, politically neutral way, where you are saying it's a transfer of cash. It could be for any reason. You can transfer cash to your brother, I can transfer cash to somebody. But basic income is a term which has a political charge, which means that you are saying that people should have basic income. I really liked the previous presenter who brought out the question of the pro-poor policies, but how they don't work at the grassroots level and all that. This also actually follows on that theme, that so people should have a basic income. So what are cash transfers? Let me give you a quick idea about. There are conditional cash transfers. The best example is Ladli Lakshmi. I don't know, in India, I think in Andhra Pradesh we have this Bangar Talli program where you say that if a girl is born, she has to be registered. After girls are born. After that, I think she has to get sterilized. These are the conditions. And the child has to go through a kind of this obstacle race, that after you should pass this exam, then you will be given this. So like that, till 10th standard she should pass, and then she will get, after 20 years or 10 years, I think she will get. But somewhere but basically you have to be a BPL. So that is a conditional cash transfer, where there are very specific conditions that you have to follow, that this money has to will be given to you if you follow X, Y, Z. This money should be used only for this purpose, and you should bring the evidence of having used it for that. Substitution cash transfer is what the terrible failed experiment of the fuel subsidy that we were all given, that we said Aadhaar card should be linked to your gas, and then you should give the 1200 rupees to that fellow, and then we will pay you cash transfer. So this was the DBT, the direct benefit transfer, that the government tried, but now I think they have temporarily withdrawn because of this election festival that we're going to have now. Unconditional cash transfer is what one is talking about, more as basic income, which is not right. The only big example we have is Brazil. Even in Brazil, the Bolsa Familia also has conditions, but there are very minimal conditions. But in future, the politicians in Brazil also plan to have a completely unconditional cash transfer. One very good example is Namibia. It's a small experiment which is still continuing in one small village, how they have tried to do this experiment of giving unconditional basic income to people, and what happened there. It's a very positive story. Now, why cash transfers? I'll run through this very quickly because they are very efficient, and you know the leakages that happen in all government programs. And the Planning Commission estimates, those who are interested, I can give you a reference to this, that in India we spend, to transfer 1 rupee of welfare, we spend 3 rupees 65 paisa as an administrative cost, which means that you have to allocate 4 rupees 65 paisa in order to send that 1 rupee to that poor man in that village. But then you know that if the 1 rupee doesn't reach there is an erosion of value by the time it reaches the last man. It makes sense to transfer directly. So, and the third point is that it pays the invisible and unpaid workers. You know that culturally in our society we have so many invisible unpaid workers, such as caregivers, such as women who are working at home, such as children who work at home on their farms, old people that work at home, all kinds of unpaid labor that we take it for granted, or underpaid labor that we get a maid who works in a house for a dirt cheap or for nothing at all. These are the people who will be compensated in this kind of an thing. Cash also stimulates local economic growth. Allocation versus utilization ratio of government social spending will be very high, in the sense, you know that governments announce this many crores and hundreds of crores and all that, but at the same time, when you actually see how they actually get spent, it's a real horror story. I think you just have to see the detail to, I don't think any horror film can actually scare you. That kind of utilization record our governments have, both state and the central government. I can give you examples, but we don't have time for that. Now, cash transfer enhances liquidity. Households, mostly in the rural poor households, their main problem is lack of liquidity, shortage of liquidity. They don't have cash. So if there is any emergency, they have to go and borrow here and there. Depending on the emergency, they have to borrow at a very high interest rate, and then they end up either becoming bonded laborers or very terribly indebted. Now, why unconditional? Unconditional because most of our welfare pipes are clogged, and we have a very poor delivery of welfare. So as I said earlier, that conditionalities are the biggest obstacle. Now, let me quickly put it this way, that one thing is our social policy is such that we have diverse, large number of social welfare schemes I mean, it's not just one or two, but there are hundreds of it. In Madhya Pradesh villages, we have identified that in each village you have about 365 welfare schemes in a single village, not to any one category, but to different categories of people. So, conditionalities and meeting those conditionalities is one of the biggest problems that you have. So, the welfare paradigm is one of demand driven. That you as a citizen, you are supposed to know all the rights that you have, all the schemes that are there. You are supposed to pick up this application form, fill it up, bring it to the office and get it passed or whatever, and then get your entitlement. But I think an entitlement to a poor man or a rich man should automatically go to that person. I think that is the very meaning of an entitlement. So when you have conditionalities, when you make your welfare demand driven, it becomes extremely difficult for people, particularly the poor, particularly those who are living in the remote villages, extremely difficult to access them. As I said, it provides income to the invisible hands, and it is cost effective, as I said earlier, and it's efficient, no leakages. So, okay. Now the experiment that we did, it's fine to talk these wonderful ideas which are politically significant, politically important, but then as a union, we said let's also try and do a research project and just test it in the ground and see when we talk about basic income or unconditional cash transfer, the first reaction anybody among the policy makers or the bureaucrats, the first reaction is saying that no, you can't trust the poor with the cash. The cash men will drink it away. The poor are not such responsible people. They don't know their priorities. Unless they are given awareness program how to spend their money and all that, they will really waste that money. I think giving cash is not at all a good idea. I think this was a very, very common knee-jerk reaction of any bureaucrat or a policy maker. Now, then we said, okay, let's actually try it out and see. In fact, before starting this project, myself was not very convinced about actually going and giving cash to the poor. Living in an NGO, having worked among NGOs and all that, I really found that. But then I think this 3 years has really helped me also to see the deeper layers of this process. Anyway, this experiment that we did was we gave unconditional cash. It was a monthly transfer to individuals. It was individual, it was not to the household. It was through bank accounts. But in a tribal village, there are two parallel experiments we had. In the tribal village, we actually paid out cash. But in other 8 general villages, which are not tribal villages, there we actually opened accounts for them. And it was universal. Okay, this is also a big debate that the basic income debate is saying that cash transfers, unconditional basic income should be universal. It should be given to every citizen, but then it's up to the government to collect the tax back through the tax system, collect it back from the rich. But I think that is smaller countries like Switzerland and all that. But a country like India, I think there are huge problems. But for the experiment, we actually did universal. We actually gave it to the landlord who had 200 acres of land and to the landless laborers as well, to the entire village as a part of this experiment. These are some details about the villages. I won't go into all that. It was a small, I'm just concentrating on the tribal village that we did. We had 2 experiments. One was 8 big villages and one was one single tribal village. We had a control village, so it's a kind of a random control trial method. So we had a transfer village and we had a control village to see the difference between the two. Now, it was a small village of 127 households, which was the basic income village. Population is 700. So let's not go into more details into that. Now, one important thing about the tribal economy is that it's where we were working was quite a lot of economic transactions happen through barter system. That when a worker works for 4 months on the land of landlord, he gets his wage through grain. Or when women go to pick red chilies in the neighboring district, they get paid in chili. They come back with 4 to 5 bags of chili. Similarly with onions and all that. So in the local shops, they take the grain and give them other items. So these are the characteristics. This is the kind of a backdrop in which we actually paid out the money. So one important characteristic is that there is extreme scarcity of cash. You actually find people living their lives without any cash. You just don't find cash in their households. Maybe some very small emergency, they must have kept something. Okay, these are some pictures of the barter system in the villages. Agriculture is the main occupation. It's combined with wage labor and mostly brick kilns and construction. And brick kilns means mostly they're bonded laborers. Livestock is an important thing in those villages. So this study actually had, we did a baseline survey, it was a census, we did an midline survey, and we did an endline survey. And we also tracked about, in the tribal village, at least about 25 families we tracked over a period of 1.5 years. The money was paid out to them, was 300 per individual, which means if there is a house, and 150 per child in a household. So if there are 4 adults and 4 children in the tribal, average tribal families, a little higher than normal families. Not normal families, the general families. They are not abnormal. So which means that they'll get 1,200 to the adults, and 4 children you will get another 600. So about 1,800 rupees a family will get every month. Every month on the 3rd or 4th, we actually went and paid out the money. And then we tracked it through a statistical survey, and also we tracked it through a qualitative research by tracking the families, what actually happened. But what we actually really, it was overwhelming to see the kind of results that came. I can go, each of these topics are very, very significant topics. I can go into each of them, but I'll just run through them. I think at the time of questions we can. One of the very important things that happened was that in the beginning of the study and the end of the study, we asked one important question, that how much time, what is your principal occupation? What is the work where you spend most of your time? So the responses, we found that people began to spend more time on their own farm, like Dr. Prasanna, Dr. Ranjan said, that they are small households. I think the tribal village is a peculiar thing about that is that it's homogeneous. All of them have some piece of land, at least half an acre, 1 acre. So they began to spend more time on their farms and less on wage labor, which means that we actually measured that the overall output during that year has increased, the overall use of fertilizer has increased, and the overall yield also has increased during that 1 year because they spent more time. And it's also another funny story that people actually, the sarpanch of the village actually reported that the drinking in the village has come down because they are spending more time on their farms and not hanging around, which is when he says that generally people drink and fight and all that. So spending more time on their farms actually is a very significant thing in terms of, because the usual criticism is that if you give cash to people, it becomes a disincentive to work. As a result, the labor market will have problems about not having enough people. That's the usual criticism coming from economists, but this was a very interesting finding. So there's a reduction of small borrowings. There is, amazingly, the livestock has doubled because that is something that is, where they can buy with small amounts of money. And in the village, you could actually see that very clearly because the village has a pond. So during the summer, we started giving money in February and we went on till January. During the summer months, they had a meeting in the village and they said that this year nobody is going to cultivate vegetables which usually some people cultivate and draw water from the pond because we have too many animals and animals require water. That it was an indicator that the livestock in the village had doubled. Livestock means it's a kind of a source of income, it's also a wide variety of use to the families. Buying medicines more regularly. So because the money we gave is not a big money, it's a small money, but you could see that money going into where it should be going. At the village level, some important things we saw, that there was a new cooperative began because there was a pond and because some people got together and said that why don't you put some fish. So 10 people got together and they formed an informal cooperative. Show you some pictures of transportation coming to the village and some two new shops. So these are at the village level we found some kind of an indicator saying that there is something that is happening in the village economy. Some we could pick what exactly is happening, but it's possible that we could not really fathom what exactly was happening. But there was a kind of a dynamic, it stimulated some growth in the village. So this is the pond, the cooperative. People use, because in a village with 7,000-8,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees you can actually put together a house, because labor is given by the neighbors and relatives and all that. Material also, they bring a lot of the wood from the village. So a lot of people actually put their money, cash into their houses, improving their houses. The fish being available in the village was very good because of the nutritional. We also actually calculated using the WHO scores. We actually calculated the nutritional levels of the people, children also. We actually took weights and heights also of the village. These are the shops, and let me quickly conclude that it can be a powerful tool to minimize poverty. It can be a means of providing economic citizenship to the marginalized, which is unpaid, underpaid and invisible labor. As a women's union, it is also an important issue for us. Actually, the fact that we opened accounts for women, for all women universally, in 8 villages, that itself was quite a major thing for women, having an account in their name. But the whole point is that we are trying to convince governments that it's not just a welfare story, but it's actually a growth story, because injecting cash into local economies can actually stimulate growth in the village. Now, let me conclude by saying just one or two disclaimers. When we say unconditional basic income, it does not mean that government has no role. It does not mean that unconditional basic income has to coexist with a larger basket of welfare, which would include possibly even food subsidy, provided government can efficiently deliver. It could include the labor line, what we call labor line, which means something like an RHA, where you give guaranteed employment to people. It could also include various other schemes that government can do, particularly the public, for example, public schools and public healthcare system. I think all those things have to be in place. Definitely have to be in place, because unconditional basic income cannot replace these other things that governments have to do. What we are saying, what we are advocating, and what we are actually asking the governments to do, we had a national conference last year, and we are going to have an international conference also this year. We are actually pleading the governments, both the state governments and also the central government, that in the basket of welfare that you give, try to rationalize, try and see what is not possible to deliver. Those things could go, that money could go into a basic income, which should go to everybody. But then to talk of universal basic income in India, it's a very, very difficult thing. Actually we are foreclosing any debate on that by asking the government to start universal basic income, because the kind of money that is required to give universal basic income to the entire population is not at this juncture practical in the country, though we have our social spending has increased. So what we are saying is that target where it is possible to target without again conditionalities, like the entire tribal population. It's possible to give universal basic income to the entire tribal population. Possibly you can have an exclusion of saying that those who have government jobs or those who have very, very minor exclusion criteria you could have. Because one of the biggest problems that we face today are the inclusion and exclusion errors. inclusion errors for the welfare programs are people who are not supposed to be included in that program get the benefit. Exclusion errors are people who are supposed to be inside the ring are actually thrown out and outside and not able to access them, either because of their remoteness or because of their disempowerment. They are so disempowered that they can't access. And you know very clearly that a lot of money. I'll give you one small example and I close. Do you find it time? Can I take some more time? Okay. In Madhya Pradesh, we've been fighting for, the government, there's a new law which came in 2004 called for the construction workers. The construction workers, that law actually, welfare law, which actually created a board for construction workers where any construction in the state over 10 lakhs, they have to pay a cess of some small percentage, 1% or something to this board. Now this board has accumulated something like 1500 crores. In the last, they had a law in 2009 onwards. In the last 5 years, they have accumulated 1500 crores, and so far they have been able to spend only about 110 crores. Why? Board says that we are not able to devise workable schemes, workable programs. But that is just a story that they tell. But then mostly what happens is that this kind of welfare money is diverted to other priorities of the government, and you know what the government's priorities are. So it is in that kind of a backdrop. If you take tribal subplan, for example, scheduled caste subplans, for example, the track record of spending that money is dismal. It's like, it's not a horror story, it's a tragedy actually. So it is against that backdrop we strongly feel that basic income is a very good idea. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
So